Today we're going to learn all the different ways to harden leather. Stay tuned. Greetings adventurers and welcome to Skill Tree, where we learn how to do just about everything. So as I mentioned pre-title screen, today I really wanted to go over all the different ways to kind of like harden leather and see if we can make leather armor more useful. So far, I've been making a lot of leather armor, but like I haven't gone that little extra step of hardening it to make it like actual armor. Which, to be honest, is fine. Like most times I'm just using it in a LARP. I'm not an SCA or anything. I'm not actually using them for combat. That doesn't mean I don't want to know how to do it. Not only that, but hardening leather has more uses than just armor. Like maybe you want to make a cool knife sheath or like a case for your phone or really anything that like needs that protection of the leather, right? Not only that, but I've always had the kind of issue where I didn't know what to do first. Like let's say you wanted to dye your leather or shape your leather or stamp your leather and harden it. What's the right order of operations for each thing? All that and more today. Before I jump into that though, you may have learned from probably this episode or just me yammering about it that we've gone to the Conquest LARP in Germany. It's the largest LARP in the world. And this past year, we had our very own skill tree camp, Dendronia. Well, tickets for next year's event just opened up and the tickets for our camp did as well. So if you want to join us, there's never been a better time because you'll have the whole rest of the year to plan it. If you're interested, link in the description below. All right, without much further ado, let's harden some leather. So I tried to be as scientific as my dumb brain could make this thing in this video. So for starters, I wanted to use a size of leather, like an ounce, the thickness of leather, that would kind of start to fall into that armor range. And I'm starting with very much the bottom of that range, is about 9 ounces. Everything over 9 ounces becomes more protective, where like under 9 ounces is more kind of costume stuff. Luckily, I just happen to have a boatload of scrap, so I can cut that stuff out of it. For consistency, I went ahead and cut out the same shape of leather out of the same piece. I think the size I went with is roughly 8x6. The size doesn't matter, they're all the same. That's all you should know. So here's my scientific method here. I'm going to go ahead and shape all of these first. I'm gonna stamp a design into them, I'm gonna dye them, and then I'm gonna go through the whole hardening process. With the hope of learning, like, maybe as I'm going through the hardening process, it's gonna screw up all the other work I did, and I'm gonna realize like, all right, I probably should have like, I don't know, shaped them and stamped them and dyed them after the fact. Or it won't matter and everything will take fine, or it won't take at all. So to start this process, I went ahead and dunked these bad boys in some water. When you're soaking leather to be able to kind of wet form it, you just go ahead and submerge it in water and leave it there until all of these little bubbles you see here stop. These bubbles are all the air and whatnot that's escaping from between the fibers of the leather. That air is being pushed out because water is taking its place. Once those bubbles stops, you know it is completely saturated. Though at this point, it's too soft, it's kind of gummy, you don't really want to work with it. So I go ahead and I set it aside for about 15 minutes. Once that's done, I use a stamp to come all the way down the middle here, giving me a nice kind of separation between one side and the other. My thought is I can use that separation there to like make a difference in the dyeing. So I'll leave one side undyed and I'll dye the other side. So we can see how all of this kind of hardening process messes with the dye and also messes with the way it's able to absorb the dye later on. I also went ahead and added this little leaf design just because it's kind of intricate, and if the design gets messed up during these processes, I figure it'll get kind of muddy, and then I'll know that you really shouldn't stamp it with anything like really ornate or anything until after part of the process. We're all seeing, I don't know, I'm learning as I go. Now to shape it, I'm just using this big old pine dowel I have here. Just simply wrapping all the pieces around it to give me this really arched look. And there is a method to this madness. I didn't want to just have like a flat plate like you'd kind of see maybe chest armor or something. Figuring this little dome here is a good representation of like how strong it deals with pressure, right? Like this is an untreated piece. When I push it, it just gives. There's no protection there. That's not what I want. I want protection. Not only that, but you know, it's easy. I had it lying around, so I figured it's good enough. Scientific in air quotes. I'm getting as close as I can get here. Anyways, after clamping those down for a good 12 hours or so, they're nice and hardened into shape. They look good, all of my details are where I need them, they're perfect. Next, I busted out some of this Fibing's light brown pro dye here, and again, only dyed half of it, including half of that center line detail. Again, I really want to see how much any of these processes might muddy up my details. So by adding as much of that detail in the process, I can kind of see like the before and after, right? If I dyed it before versus if I try to dye it afterwards, or if they get muddy and kind of disappear as I go. Hopefully this will help me kind of discern what the best order of operations to do all this stuff in is. Though one of them I dyed all the way through. That is this one here. This is my control. Basically, this is going to be an untreated piece here that I can compare all of the other pieces to. Okay, so the first method I want to try is the one that I feel like I've heard about the most, which is boiled leather, right? Like I always hear whenever you're talking about like hardened leather in fantasy books or whatever, it's like he wore a boiled leather cuirass. Anyways, to do it, I grabbed a large pot of water and placed it on my electric burner. I also grabbed this little thermometer here so that I can keep track of the temperature of that water. Now, from everything that I read, I saw that it needs to be about 180 degrees for this to work. I also read that the piece of leather that you're going to be submerging into that should already be soaked through with water. This is because as that heat really starts to harden the leather, if it's not already soaked all the way through, it's gonna take a longer time for that hot water to kind of transfer its temperature. What that means is all of your edges, everything that's more exposed, is gonna harden first and start to curl, and everything more towards the middle isn't going to be affected at all. It's gonna give you a really uneven kind of temper, I guess if you wanna call it that, and make the whole thing kind of wonky. So to make sure I do this right, I went ahead and stuck this bad boy, marked boil on the bottom, into a pot of room temperature water. By the way, I marked the bottom of all of these just so I knew which was which for all the different methods. So I let that soak through in the 10 minutes or so it took for this water to boil, and then I placed the leather into the pot. Now, I was surprised that while it was soaking, it didn't lose its form because it soaked all the way through, so I assumed it would get soft again and kind of fall apart, but it did once it hit the water. It not only immediately flattened back out, but within about 15 seconds started to totally curl in on itself, shrink up and become this kind of little potato thing here, you see. It was like a shrinky dink. It just it went from here to like whoomp. Though at this point, it's actually really stretchy. So I just did my best to reform it over the stick here and left it to dry. So this has already taught me a thing. If you're going to be boiling your leather, you do the shaping afterwards. Preferably with something you could really stretch it out and either like nail it or staple it down into place, because it stretches a lot, but it has a lot of like resilience. It wants to spring back really hard. It was kind of cool, I'm not gonna lie. But yeah, any detail that was in there, it not only like shrunk, became muddy, it was messy. Though at this point, we have a pot of hot water that is perfect for our next way we're gonna go ahead and try to harden this. And that is by using stearic acid. Stearic acid, I guess, is usually used in like candle and soap making as I think a hardener for it. In fact, this one here says it's derived from palm or coconut oil and is a natural saturated fatty acid used in preparation of personal care, cosmetics, and food products. So I imagine it's safe for you, though I still wouldn't want to like touch it raw, right? Anyways, this stuff melts just like wax. So I went ahead and put it inside of this little measuring cup here, and then put it right into my hot water so that it can melt, acting like a double boiler. Not gonna lie, because I had so much, it took like an hour to melt. I started it at around 10 p.m., which I regretted, because around 11, I was a little tired, and I knew I still had a whole lot more work to do. But that's where we are. I'm committed to it at this point. Now, I didn't want to just add the leather right to it. One, because the leather is cold and this stuff hardens up pretty quickly. I was letting it sit around 150 degrees, right around its melting point. I didn't want it to be too much hotter because I didn't want the same thing to happen with the boiling to happen with this. That's not what we're going for. But again, I don't want to add the leather right to it because one, I'm afraid it'll cool down too fast, and two, just like with the boiling, if it takes a while for the heat and the product to transfer all the way through it, it's going to be a little bit uneven as it absorbs. But if you keep it hot, it's going to have a lot more time to absorb because the heat of the leather is helping absorb everything in, if that makes sense. I feel like I said the word absorb like 13 times there, but you understand what I mean, I'm pretty sure. So to do this, I put the leather onto a little wire rack, stuck it in my oven, and set that sucker to 150 degrees. After about 5 minutes, I took that leather out and dunked it as far as it would go into this product. And here's the first issue I have with this method, is that you need like a really deep something in order to, like, if I had a whole like chest plate or something, I'd need a lot of this stuff to make this happen, right? But with this, I did the same thing I did with the water. I just kind of left it in there for like 4 to 6 minutes while the little bubbles went up until they stopped. At that point, I knew it was fully saturated. And then I just kind of took it out and wiped it off. You definitely want to wipe off any of the excess because it hardens to be this really like white, extremely hard kind of crust. And if you don't wipe that off, it's going to be kind of a beast to get off later on. Speaking of which, I just poured all the extra into this silicone mold here so that I'd have it to use again later if I needed to. Assuming it can. Leave in the comment section below. I don't know, can you reuse this after you've melted it? I would think so, right? Anyways, the astute of you will have noticed that I put 2 pieces of leather in the oven at 150 degrees. That's because our next method is actually very similar, and that is using wax to harden it. I've heard of this method used a lot too, so I'm really eager to see how this works out. Now, just like the last time, I used the boiled water we already had to melt my wax. I dunked my next piece into the wax as far as it would go. But just as before, once I was sure it was completely saturated between that 4 to 6 minute mark, I took it out and wiped it off so there wouldn't be all excess dried wax on the surface. Now I know I'm flying through all of these. At the end, we're going to measure how well they perform side by side. So just so you know, I'm not just gonna fly through them and not show you how it goes, I promise. But for the final way that I'm going to test these is by using the baking method. Anywho, to do this, we don't want to go ahead and just shove something into the oven because there's a really good possibility of it burning, and again, we don't want to have it affecting the outside before it affects the inside, right? We want this whole thing to happen evenly. And to be honest with you, this is like, it's almost like the boiling method more controlled, in that you want to go ahead and soak the leather so it is covered by water, and then you put it in the oven. So technically, you're making all that water get real hot, gas off, leaving you with a hopefully not shrunk piece, but a hardened piece. Plasticized, I think is what it's called. Anyways, again, to do this, I just put it in some water, let it soak all the way through, while I set the oven to preheat for 190 degrees. Once it's soaked all the way through, I just stuck that sucker in the oven for about an hour, until it came out like this, nice and hard and not shrunk at all, which was awesome. I, for one, am really glad that worked out. I was afraid that I would screw it up and burn it and have to do it again. And I'm traveling within the next couple of hours and I need to pack. And I was like, yay close to packing all of this stuff so I could do it on the road and do this in my hotel room. I'm glad I don't have to pack that, but the one thing I will be packing is today's sponsor, Fume. Now, if you've been watching me for any length of time, you know that I absolutely love my Fume. That's a weird sentence. I'm gonna explain to you what that is. Fume is a flavored air device that does exactly what it says on the tin. It flavors the air. It uses these awesome little flavor cores here that you put right inside so that you can take in air through it and taste whatever flavor is in that core. It's really cool. My favorite is the orange vanilla, but I've really been feeling this crisp mint lately too. It's really good. And it honestly helps me focus just to have something in my hands while I'm working, while I'm at my computer, to just kind of have there, taste a little bit. It's a non-toxic, guilt-free alternative to any of the other bad habits I might be taking up. It's non-addictive, you can take it anywhere, and it doesn't have any batteries. You don't have to like change anything out except for the flavor cores, which is awesome because there's so many. Anyways, if you want to join me or any of the 300,000 people who have enjoyed Fume, you're in luck, because for a limited time you can use my code SKILLTREE to get your free topper for your Fume. I'm still waiting for mine to come. It actually makes it so the tip is like softer and more kind of chewable and comfortable in your mouth, which is great, because not only do I like to fiddle things, but like I really like to chew things. I destroy all my pencils and stuff. And that just makes this the perfect kind of thing to have on me at all times. So to get yours, go to Tryfume, that's TRYFUM.com, and use code SKILLTREE, or just use my QR code down here to get your free topper with your journey pack today. Okay, so now that we have all of these things hardened, it's time to continue on with our experiment. And I just kind of wanted to start with seeing how it takes dye. So starting with the baked one, I went ahead and applied the dye to all the area that didn't have it before. And as you can see here, no difference. It took it perfectly. So like, you could dye it before or you could dye it after. It really doesn't matter with this particular method here, turns out. Good to know. The one that I use the acid on though, I don't think it's gonna be the same. One, it looks awesome. Like it looks and almost feels like plastic. And the acid completely changed the color of it. And when I go to add the dye to it, where the acid is, just does not take any of the dye. You can see it sitting on the surface. It doesn't even try to soak in. After I give it a little bit of time and wipe it away, there is just no difference at all. Which is cool. I think that acid actually waterproofs the leather as well, but if you want it to be a certain color, you gotta get that color in well before you go ahead and treat it with this acid. And man, the same thing with this wax one too. It drastically changed color as well. Even darker, completely taking over the dye that I had put in. Like you'd swear this already has more dye on it. It doesn't, but when I try to add more dye to it just like before, it just kind of sits on the surface and does nothing. So again, you want to have this colored whatever color you want it to be before you treat it. And with both of those, the color is gonna change. It's gonna become way darker than it was before. Oh, finally, my little potato here that I boiled. Look how cute it is. Though even after it dyed, the difference between the two sides were noticeable, with the side I dyed afterwards having a lot more kind of texture and the side I dyed previous being much more even. Also, notice the differences between it and the control one. Like look at how tiny the little leaf stamp is compared. It really is like a little shrinky dink. Oh, speaking of, I forgot to mention the fact that like all the rest of the detail on all of them looked really good. Like there was no difference in the detail at all. So yeah, for all of them, I think doing the detail first and then hardening them will work, except for the boiling one. My whole potato, it's so cute. It's not just cute, it's amazing. Look at the difference in size. These started off as the same size piece. Not only is it tinier, but it's way thicker. More than twice as thick. Remember, the one I started with was 9 ounce, and the measurement device I have for that only goes to 16. It was bigger than that. I think it's like 18 to 19 ounce after it was boiled. It is a beast. But the damn thing's also as hard as a rock, so we'll see how it goes. Okay, so that is the color treatment figured out for all these different things. But really, the crux of this is how does it harden? Which one is the best way? So we're gonna use our control to judge against, right? Because nothing's been done with this. And our control, it doesn't really protect against anything. It's easy to flex, it gives as soon as you push on it. It's untreated leather, which I've just used like my pocket knife to cut. It's not particularly hard. So yeah, it is like the base of what we've got going on here. Next up is the wax, which not only looks pretty nice, but definitely has a lot more structure to it than the untreated, showing very little give when it's pushed down on, though still being kind of flexible when you try to flex it by hand. That said, when you flex it, it does have these little stress marks that appear almost immediately. Next up, the acid hardened. I'm not gonna lie, it was one of my favorites. Not only because it looked really pretty, like even it compared to the wax version here, I like how mellow the colors are and just kind of how shiny the overall thing is. But honestly, this feels almost like plastic. It's so solid. I didn't just push down on it, I beat the hell out of this thing. It flexed the least out of all of them, and the smaller bends kind of down at the bottom almost didn't flex at all. Though when it did, it also did leave those same little stress fractures down there at the bottom. Stress fractures is a little extreme, like in the finish, but the leather itself was still solid. It didn't break. Now, what follows next is a myriad of the stupidest yet most effective tests I could think of. Honestly, I'm kind of proud of them. I'm gonna stand behind them. The first is the egg test. You can think of something more clever. Leave it down in the comments section below, like scrambled leather or sunny side protected. I don't know. You can think of something better. I made the damn things, you make the fun, you do it. So here's my plan. I'm gonna take the egg and I'm gonna put it in this plastic bag to save me cleanup. And then I'm gonna see how well each piece of armor protects it from bludgeoning damage. We're gonna test all the different types of damage here. Bludgeoning, we're gonna try piercing, and we're going to try slashing. Now, I didn't want the vibration of me hitting the thing to make it like slam against the table and break it and give me a false negative. So I went ahead and added this piece of foam to the bottom first, and then put my leather over the top. To bludgeon it, I'm using this little mallet I have here. Now, to be honest with you, I've got another project going on, my workshop's a mess, so I don't know where that mallet is. So I'm gonna use this as a stand-in. I want you to know that I'm not friggin' slamming this thing. I know this is kind of a little bit of a crazy test. I know these things are gonna give a bit. I'm basically letting my arm kind of dead arm fall, and that's the amount of weight I'm using. I think it's still enough that it would hurt. It would hurt you, for sure. Not you personally, it would hurt me as well. But it would hurt. And that's definitely more than enough usually to friggin' demolish an egg, right? And using my control, I did indeed demolish that egg. That egg stood not a chance in hell. So with that out of the way, up next is our baked version, which I smashed, and honestly, it broke. It did break. But like nowhere near as bad as the control broke, right? Like it opened the egg, the yolk came out, it wasn't pretty, but most of the egg was actually still kind of intact. So yes, it broke, it went through, the force definitely went through, but not horrible, not as bad as the control. And honestly, with the waxed hardened piece, it was kind of the same deal. If anything, even less. Where the egg was mostly still intact, definitely broken, but mostly still intact. My shining star, though, is this bad boy, the acid hardened. I gave it a good shot, and look at it. That's still a whole ass egg. I told you, this thing is it's like plastic. It's so good. I was genuinely surprised the egg survived. I didn't think it would survive any of them. I thought it would be like a little matter of differences. Like this one was turned into a level dust. Well, this one, you could still make out the fact that it was an egg at one point in time. But this straight up protected the egg. That's kind of cool. Now for my little potato here, I was worried that it was smaller and the egg would like by default be touching it already and thus more force would get through. But actually no, it was tall enough that the egg fit right underneath it. In fact, if you really look at it, it's technically taller than the other ones. So it has a better chance. Though surprisingly, the egg still broke. Of all the ones that broke though, this broke the least. In fact, that is still a usable egg. Like the yolk isn't even broken. I could use that for breakfast. So though I haven't been keeping score at all so far, I would definitely say the little acid one is number 1, and my boiled little potato here is number 2 for like bludgeoning test. Though I did decide, like, this isn't a 100% a great test. Eggs are very fragile. I wanted to see what it'd feel like if it was on my person, right? And with my potato here, awesome. Didn't feel anything through it. Well protected. So much so that I stupidly thought that maybe that mallet just didn't hurt much at all anyways. I can go good with it. I can hit myself. So I put on my control and I gave myself a good whack. And it hurt like hell. It's one of those times where you're like, I just did a stupid thing. My hand went immediately numb. That really hurt, guys. It's so stupid. Don't do that. It's like, oh, I wonder if this vest is really bulletproof. So dumb. Though I did start the test, so damn it, I'm gonna finish it. Though honestly, all the rest did a great job protecting. The bake barely felt like a little slap. Same with the wax, it didn't hurt at all. I even went for a second one. And the acid was so well protective that I went for a third, much harder. Having felt what the control, that little pad right there, would feel like and how quickly it hurt, like right on my bone, I would never in a million years hit myself as hard as I hit myself with that mallet that third time there. The acid one totally works for the bludgeoning damage. Let me tell you what, I felt nothing. Again, same with the boiled at the beginning though. Like that's what made me cocky in the first place. Those two are neck and neck with protective power, I'll tell you that much. But though I know they can really help protect me from some damage, I wanted to see how well they stand up to a really good ass kicking. So I decided I want to hit them real hard. But I don't want to wear it this time. So I made myself a little fake arm where I wrapped this piece of pine dowel in this foam here to simulate the squishiness of my arm with a hard bone underneath. Not exactly ballistics gel level science here, but we'll see how it goes. Again, starting with my control, I hit it hard with my mallet. And honestly, not even a little damage. Like, the control stood up really well to that. So much so I decided to bring this steel pipe to the party. That's not a sentence that usually stands up in a court of law. But yeah, I thwacked the shit out of this thing. And again, it was fine. Totally like nothing. And that is an interesting thing. So whether or not you do any of these other treatment methods, when you wet form something or you soak the leather all the way, I've noticed it inherently has some hardness to it, harder than regular leather tends to be. This thing took that whack and had not even a blemish on it, which is pretty cool. In fact, most of them stood up like this. The baked leather between both the mallet and the pipe showed absolutely no damage. The wax, on the other hand, did great with the mallet, but the pipe left a noticeable indent. Didn't look bad, but there was definitely an indent that was left behind. Surprisingly, the acid-dipped one did the worst in this challenge, taking a small dent with the mallet and a really big dent with my steel pipe. Though I guess that's unsurprising, because again, this thing is almost like plastic, so whereas in the other ones have a little bit of give to help distribute that force, this one almost has no give at all, so it eats all of that damage into itself. And the final one, my little boiled potato here, is a friggin' shining star. Just no damage whatsoever. Just ate that. Perfectly fine. Not gonna lie, I started off super rooting for the acid-dipped one, and I end up just loving my little potato. I love the underdog anyways. It's just so cute. Oh, look at this thing. Nuts. All right, but that's bludgeoning damage. Next, we're going for piercing damage. And honestly, I'm not gonna waste too much of your time here. Leather, not dope with piercing damage. Every single one of them just gave way to this dagger. Didn't even bother to put up a defense, not even a who goes there. It just slid right on through. Even my potato here, that's like twice as thick as all the rest of them. There's a hole that I can see through this thing. Didn't stop anything. So yeah, leather armor, even hardened leather armor, not great for piercing. So that only leaves us with slashing damage. For this, I decided to use this sword that friend of the channel Firebrand made for us. Link in the description below in case you want a custom sword made. Actually, he made those daggers that I was using earlier on a stab through the leather too. Really good stuff. Fun story, I didn't realize how sharp he actually sent this sword because I don't make a habit of like touching the blade or whatever. But like, this thing is razor sharp, which is perfect for this challenge. Using my little foam thing again, I just tried it on some regular leather just to see how it did. And again, just barely letting like arm weight down, it had no problem just cutting right through this piece of leather. And honestly, same with the baked leather too. It bit right into that leather, cutting all the way through. And it was the same exact story with the wax leather. In fact, I'm not gonna belabor this point. It was exactly the same with the stearic acid dip too. In fact, I had really high hopes for my little potato, but this thing got cut through as well. And this honestly surprised me. Like, I knew piercing damage would be bad, but I thought it would help with slice, right? So then I thought maybe my test was flawed. Because though that little foam wrap thing had some give, it was still hard in the middle. And I was thinking maybe I was just kind of making a glorified chopping block where this thing couldn't really escape. If it was really hitting me, I'd have some give. My flesh would have a little bit more give. I'm not sure it would be this easy to cut. So to try to help, I went ahead and tightened this thing into my vise so that it was strong enough to give enough give when I pushed on it, but still solid enough that I thought it would act kind of like one of those mats that you try to cut as like a swordsman. And let me preface this by saying I'm not a swordsman. Like, I've had some training, but I am by no means like swords expert or anything like that. So my edge alignment, my body positioning, no way it's going to be optimal or even correct. That said, this first strike I did on the control bit right into the leather. So didn't this next strike on the baked one, cutting straight through this bad boy. The waxed I hit here stood absolutely no chance. One of the largest digs I got there. And same with the stearic acid, cut right into this thing. leaving me with this big old gash that would have definitely cut the person underneath. And finally, even my potato completely opened up to my sword. All of these were on the first hit without like a lot of power behind it. And again, I'm not an awesome swordsman, so there's no way that I had like perfect edge alignment or whatever. Which just means they didn't protect from the cut. Which again, really surprised me. Is it better than having no armor? Sure. But for piercing and cutting, man, no, it doesn't really work at all. I'd rather have like multiple layers of linen or some kind of gambeson underneath. Which I guess, I mean, of course, that's how this is supposed to be, right? You have this outer layer that kind of stops stuff, but then you should have a thick inner layer of a gambeson or something. And though it did cut through it, I mean, it definitely didn't get to the point like it would cut me, but it wouldn't like take my friggin' arm off or anything. So maybe that is it doing its job, right? It may cut through, but it's not getting through enough that it would like really destroy me. In fact, hold on. I still have the thing. Like I said, my place is a mess here right now. Man, I don't know though. It seems like it went all the way through the foam on all of these cuts, right down into the wood. Let me have a quick look. Oh yeah, I used double-sided tape for this, so it's hard to rip apart. But this straight up chunked right into the wood. So actually, I think if it wasn't wood stopping it, it would have been bone. That would have been rough cuts all the way through. So yeah, I don't think that leather armor can hang unless you have really something underneath it that's stopping that cut from coming through, like mail or again, like a gambeson. Just a heads up here though, quality on this sword. After all of those, clearly it's hitting like pine board underneath, still cut, still razor sharp. In fact, I went to wipe off some of the leather residue here with an old pair of pants, and it just cut straight through them. It's genuinely the sharpest sword I have. It is incredible. Just saying, Firebrand did a real good job on that sword. This is real nice. But yeah, now we know. For bludgeoning damage, sure, leather really helps, especially like the ones with the hardening process in it. That's fantastic. Even more so if you have a gambeson or something underneath it. But for piercing damage, absolutely not. Almost like it wasn't there. Completely went through it. And cutting damage, middling. I'm gonna say, if you have a gambeson, you have all the layers underneath, it probably won't get you bad. And it's definitely better than having nothing. But yeah, it's not awesome for actually sharp slicing. That genuinely surprised me. I thought it would be really good for the slicing. I knew it wouldn't be good for piercing, but maybe I'm wrong. Leave down in the comment section below what you think. Is there a way to have done this better? Is there something I'm missing in general, or is it just not a thing? It's just kind of in Skyrim and video games in general that like leather armor is a really great thing. So yeah, please leave any of that in the comment section below. I'd love to know what you think in different ways we can make that better. And again, even though it isn't awesome for armor, it's definitely better than nothing. It isn't like the best. One, this is thinner. This is the thinnest I would do anything armored. So if you did like maybe the acid with like a 12 ounce, maybe that'll be better. But for non-armored purposes, this is awesome. Like as a knife holster or a gun holster, this would be fantastic. A pouch of some sort, anything you want that extra structure for. Like it's super strong, the finish is really pretty. It'll definitely protect anything you have inside of it. So yeah, these are all really great techniques, just not necessarily for like armored combat. Unless bludgeoning damage. It really does help with the bludgeoning damage. All right, that's all I got. I hope you enjoyed this episode. I know it was a little bit different, but this is something I've really wanted to know for a long time. If you enjoyed what I did here today, why don't you give me some of that like and love, and don't forget to subscribe so you know when I release new content. In the meantime, though, keep leveling up, you. You made it to the end screen. YouTube loves it when you do that. It's a fantastic way to support this channel. Another great way to support this channel is by joining these people's noble ranks. These are our Patreon members, and we could not do this without them. It's because of them we're able to buy all of the ingredients to harden our leather, the leather itself, the tools to cut it, and everything in between. Special shout out to our newest high tier Patreon members, Lucas Jamelson and Cinder. And an extra special shout out to our Grandmaster level Patreon members, Andrew Smith, Froggy, Dragon Designs, and Yuri Sastro. If you like what we do here and want to support us, consider joining our Patreon, link in the description below. Otherwise, you can check out one of these videos here that YouTube thinks you'd like, and that helps out a lot too. Now, if you don't mind, I'm going to invest in some metal armor. I love my leather, it just doesn't protect.